On today's show, we review the CHL USA Prospect Challenge. We'll talk about all the details on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related to you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalikesh, QMJHL and crossover scout for elite prospects, usually joined by Sebastian High, USHL and crossover scout for elite prospects. He can't be here today, so I'll be covering for you the CHL USA Prospect Challenge. The best player, the best draft eligibles of the CHL faced off against the USNTDP in a 2-game challenge. We'll cover all of that today. We'll start off with the breakdown of the lineup. So how did things end up? We had predicted the lineups on last episode, and on this episode here, we'll be kind of reviewing what we had predicted versus what ended up happening on the 2 games that occurred. And then in the second segment, we'll look at the standouts for both Team Canada and Team USA. And then in the third segment, we'll look at the disappointments of the guys who underproduced in these 2 games. Before I get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get up to $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with the breakdown of the lineups, what ended up happening on those days. So in terms of what Sebastian and I had predicted, we actually predicted Malcolm Spence to be the first line winger on the line with Michael Misa and Porter Martone, who were clear-cut, definite first liners. There was no doubt there, so don't give us credit for that. That was a super easy prediction. But the question was, who was going to play with them? We thought Malcolm Spence would have a great shot in that spot. It ended up being Caleb Desnoyers as the first line center with Misa to his left and Martone to his right. And that line stayed the same throughout those 2 games and dominated. They were excellent in these 2 games. We'll get into the details of who stood out really later on. But Desnoyers at center was winning the faceoffs. Misa was doing the hard work on the forecheck with Desnoyers. And mostly Martone was playing as the F3, kind of settling in pockets and trying to find some areas of influence where he could let his skills shine. The other side of that is Malcolm Spence was not only not on the first line, he was a 4th line left winger, surprisingly enough. Again, we had predicted for him to be a clear-cut top 6er. I was debating whether he'd be on the first line or the second line. He ended up being a 4th liner, so that was quite a bit of a surprise, but honestly, that 4th line worked really well for Team Canada. They were mainly playing with Spence was mainly playing with Justin Carbonneau to his right, a bit of change at center, but basically it was a very skillful 4th line. I found them really interesting to watch in this game, in these 2 games. So that was interesting. Carter Bear was another kind of wild card because he's been popping up on draft boards left and right. Really hard to predict kind of where he'd end up in this lineup. We ended up settling as a 3rd line winger next to Braden Coots and Justin Carbonneau. Carter Bear played on the 2nd line and then was the 13th forward. So if you balance it out, we were kind of right, you know. Basically, he didn't play a minute on the 3rd line. He was a 2nd line winger, then got bumped down to the 13th forward. He exchanged spots basically with Jake O'Brien, who was good in this tournament as well. The other side of that, and on the defensive side, there was a bit of shakeup compared to what we had predicted. I kind of pushed for Reese Hamilton at 2nd pair right D, mainly because I'm not a fan of him. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the way that he plays or the decisions that he makes, but I thought that Team Canada would be more likely to play him in that position. He ended up being the 7th defenseman, and that 2nd pair was Jackson Smith and Cameron Reed, which is an absurd 2nd pair in these 2 games. They were phenomenal. Kudos to both of them. They played a fantastic pair of games there. But yeah, Hamilton was the 7th defenseman in both games. And surprisingly enough, Quinn Beauchesne, who we had predicted would be the 7th defenseman, was a staple on that 3rd pair with Kashan Aitchison. Going back to the attack, I want to focus on Ben Kindle for a second because we had seen him as a clear outsider in this roster, but he was a staple on the 3rd line wing, and he actually played pretty well in these 2 games. So decent tournament for him as well. Although I will say for the goaltenders, Sebastian and I were absolutely right about that. It was Josh Ravensbergen in the first game and Jack Ivankovic in the second one. And I think Ravensbergen, I think he dug a bit of a gap between him and Ivankovic in these two games. I think Ivankovic allowed 2 goals on 9 shots within the first, in the second game that he played. And honestly, I think he's better when he's facing 50 shots rather than 12. It's absurd to say, but Ivan Kovic is a very momentum-driven goalie, and when he doesn't have to scramble left and right and make absurd saves all night like he has been for Brampton this season, he kind of struggles, which is very peculiar and interesting. But yeah, Ivan Kovic was less challenged and struggled as a result. Ravensburger wasn't challenged at all, and usually is challenged in Prince George. But honestly, he handled it much better. And I think overall has shown a bit of a gap between him and Ivan Kovic, even though both of them are excellent goaltenders in their own rights. I think Ravensburger at this stage, especially after these two games, has just continued to cement himself as a top goaltender in this 2024 or 2025 NHL draft class. On the USA side, um, just honestly one major note in terms of things that changed compared to where we had them. Ben Kevon played in the top six in both games. He played on the second line in the first game and on the first line in the second game. When we had actually predicted for him to be a kind of rotating in fourth line winger, mainly because of what we saw from him at the USNTDP when he did play for them. When he was called up, he played 8 and 10 minutes a game, I believe, in the 2 games that I watched of him. So very little ice time, and then all of a sudden he's getting top 6 opportunities next to Jack Murtagh and Cole McKinney, some shifts with William Moore. So that was pretty interesting. I really wasn't expecting that. He ended up being a staple in their top 6. We'll get into how he performed in a second. But still, the fact that he made himself a staple in the top 6 when he's not even an NTDP prospect usually, is very, very interesting. But apart from that, pretty bang on. We got the deep pair, we got the deep pairings right. We got most of the forward lines right, and it's mainly because these guys play together all the time. This is just the NTDP that we've been watching all year, so it's pretty easy to predict our lineups in terms of knowing who's going to play with who because they've been playing together all year, right? McKinney and Murtagh have been inseparable since the start of the year. William Moore and Vashnica have been inseparable this year, right? There are certain pairings that have been together all year, certain small rotations, but mainly this was just the NTDP. Yeah, they ended up losing both games, unsurprisingly. Although in the second game, they gave a bit of a challenge to Team Canada. Canada ended up barely squeaking through with a 3-2 win, even though they had tripled Team USA shots. They played really, really well. Played some physical hockey, some aggressive hockey. They were trying to take the game to Canada. I mean, eventually there's only so many, frequent defensive zone sequences as you can survive until your goalie just falters and eventually a puck goes in, right? I think the main issue with USA in these 2 games is they just couldn't solve the defensemen. The defensemen for Canada were the standouts, and that'll be clear in the second segment. We're talking about those standouts, but to sum it up, Team USA couldn't get any offensive cycles going. They just couldn't sustain offensive pressure or stay in the offensive zone for long enough to create much of anything, which made it really, really difficult for them to be able to perform at a high level and create some more scoring chances. But they scored 2 goals on Ivan Kovic, benefited from the fact that he was kind of sulking in the crease, not really knowing what to do with just basically standing there, essentially. Ask any goalie. Momentum is really important. You need to face many shots in order to be to stay in the game mentally. I think that's what kind of happened with Ivan Kovic in this game. And USA took advantage of that, scored a couple goals, and started creating off of that. But really, it wasn't even fair. This was always going to be a bloodbath. This was always going to be an uphill battle for the NTDP. This is one of the weaker NTDP classes we've seen in a decent while. And somehow this is the year where they end up playing all of the best draft eligibles in the CHL. It was always going to be a bloodbath, right? So Canada, the CHL takes these 2 games easily and runs away with them. But that's our first segment done where we break down kind of the lineups and results. We'll get into the second segment where we talk about some standouts. We'll talk about all the prospects who stood out in these 2 games, had some good performances, and potentially increased their draft talk. We'll get into that in just a second, but just a word from our sponsors first here at Locked On NHL Prospects.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you're in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. Whether you want to take those swings on American football or European football, the choice really is yours. Or perhaps you prefer tennis or golf, or maybe hockey is your favorite sport. If you're listening to this podcast, I think there's a decent chance that that is the case. Whatever it is, FanDuel has something to offer every kind of sports fan. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
If you're looking to buy cheap tickets last minute to any event, Gametime is the best place to secure them. Gametime is safe, secure, incredibly easy to use, and they are obsessed with saving you money. They've got deals every single step of the way to make sure you get the best price for your tickets every time. Last minute deals, zone deals, flash deals, you name it. They also have the Gametime guarantee that makes sure you always get the best price. And they now also have the all-in pricing toggle in the app, which you can toggle in order to see exactly the price of your ticket after fees, after taxes, so you know exactly what you're paying for, and you can make the best decision for your wallet. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super simple. You just create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. So download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment here, we'll be talking about the standouts for the CHL USA Prospect Challenge. We'll talk about both Canada standouts and USA standouts. Now, I will admit Canada's standouts list is much longer, and that's quite normal. It's just that they had basically half the first round in this roster here, so they had a lot of opportunities for players to show their chops. But what you'll find really interesting is the forwards make up barely half of this list. Most of the defensemen are who stood out in this game. So we'll get into that right now. First and foremost, the main standout for me remains Michael Misa. So effective down low, such an intelligent forechecker, such a detailed attacker, always in the right lanes, always well positioned. He understands the offensive game so profoundly and with such an advanced level that more and more it seems like the race at first overall kind of starts with Michael Misa, rather than him being kind of an outsider for it. Everything he does is so incredibly detailed. He showed a lot more playmaking chops and skill in these last few games, in these last two games, and I really, really liked what I saw from him in terms of being able to delegate at the right times. I even thought sometimes he was a bit too generous. He was making passes in situations where he had a lane on goal. I think he was trying to find Caleb Desnoyers pretty much everywhere on the ice. There's a certain moment in the second game where the cross ice pass came to him. He had an opportunity to shoot, but he tried to zip it back to Desnoyers, who had initially made him the pass, and that pass didn't connect. It was an advanced read. The idea was great because if he made that pass, Desnoyers was wide open with an open cage. But I think Misa should have still taken the shot. And that was kind of the story of the last two games. Apart from that, though, positionally perfect, forechecking wise perfect, physical in this game as well, throwing hits, getting involved on along the boards and battles. Really, really aggressive in this game. He actually set the tone within the first 5 seconds of the first game. Started a forecheck and threw a hit. He's that type of player. So he was really phenomenal. Caleb Desnoyers was also very interesting on that line. He was a center. He was a main forechecking force. He was a guy kind of driving a lot of the play in terms of trying to win battles down low and making plays around the cycle. But really, I mean, he was still the third cog of that line. I mean, Porter Martone was still phenomenal. Very good in terms of his handling skill, his finesse plays. But we'll get into why he doesn't make the standouts list. What impressed me with Desnoyers is his ability to play with those guys and keep up with them. Right? I mean, we already know he's a very intelligent player, very, very smart with a decent motor. But the competitiveness he showed in a game where, honestly, Team Canada didn't really need to compete that hard. They could have easily won these games. Desnoyers was still a consistent competitor, a consistent battler. And there's a reason why he's on that first line. Watching him in these two games, it's been very clear that, he has the chops to play with top-end players and uplift their skill sets. That's exactly what he did in this game. His assist on Michael Misa's goal in the second game, just watch that if you can find it somewhere. The highlights will probably be on TSN. it's worth your time. It was a gorgeous cross-seam pass right to the back door to a wide open Michael Misa on the power play. Great play from him. He impressed me a lot in this game. On the subject of forwards, Brady Martin was phenomenal. He played on the third line most of this tournament, and he was an absolute train. I mean, he's country strong, really well built. He's got immense strength for an average frame, honestly, but he handles himself so well in battles. Honestly, made USA defenders looked like they were 5'10", a buck 60 when they're actually bigger and stronger than him. Just out muscled players down low. Again, just a train offensively, trucking guys left and right on the forecheck, reverse hits, all the physical details were there. I think the playmaking skill was on and off, but when it was on, it was phenomenal. He took some shots. He got involved offensively. There was a lot to like from Brady Martin's game as well. There's also Jake O'Brien, who seems to always be in the same conversations as Brady Martin in terms of range. I thought Brady Martin was a better of the two, but Jake O'Brien also had a great tournament, great couple of games there. Phenomenal playmaker. That's really kind of the crux of his game. Is really everything centers around that playmaking skill. Connects plays incredibly well. Sees the ice incredibly well. Maybe needs to show a bit more pace, a bit more urgency, a bit more speed. Not the best skater, but my goodness, is that playmaking skill on full display every single night. And he was really impressive, both as a 13th forward in the first game and as a second line winger on the second game. He was just really good. And finally, in terms of forwards for Canada, Cameron Schmidt, no surprise there, who was the second line right winger in both games, showcased the immense speed and skill he has in transition. He had a couple of moments where he could have chosen his moments better in terms of driving play up the ice and cutting through defenses. And especially the shot selection was on and off, but the skill is ridiculous. The amount of plays that he made where you're like, I mean, some kids take till they're 22, 23 to figure out that those plays are available, and he's seeing them right away. I don't really care that he's 5'7". He outworks players. He wins his races, wins his battles, is incredibly aggressive, loves to play in-your-face hockey. I like him. I think he's a top 10 pick. Now let's move on to the defensemen. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 7 defensemen on Team Canada earning standout grades. So Matt Schaefer, the conversation starts and ends with him. He has cemented himself as a top 2 pick in the 2025 NHL draft. Him and Michael Misa, for me, are the standouts so far. I might even slightly prefer Schaefer, depending on how the rest of the season goes. He's phenomenal. Immense mobility, ridiculous amount of range. He's really versatile as well. He can defend, he can attack, he can jump up in the rush, he can sit back. Any role that Canada asked from him in this tournament, he did very well. Scored a goal and assist in the first game, was a clear player of the game in that first match. It was really good in the second one as well. So very impressive game from him. Blake Fiddler, his D partner, was phenomenal as well. Really aggressive off the rush. Loves to play in-your-face hockey. He's a big physical defenseman and used it really well, but also has some flashes of activation, aggression offensively, jumping up in rushes, making plays like that. And him and Schaefer were basically a dream team together. They played really well and played off each other's strengths incredibly well as well. And the second pair, as a pair, gets a standout grade as well. Jackson Smith was phenomenal. Amazing skating. The physicality in this game in these two matches was off the charts. He was trucking guys left and right, shrugging off forecheckers so easily, and he had some flashes of creativity. There's a specific move he made in the second period of the second game where he was basically pressured hard, didn't have a lot of time to react, just kind of banked it off the boards and spun off his check, and then made another bank pass into the neutral zone as if it was nothing. So his panic threshold is getting higher and higher, and it's really interesting to watch him progress. And Cameron Reid was playing really good hockey next to him. Jackson Smith was doing most of the defensive breakups. He was unsolvable off the rush. Cameron Reid was really good at reading off of him, figuring out what his D partner is going to do, and collecting those loose pucks and driving them up the ice. It was a great pairing. They worked really well together. They're more than standouts in these two games. And finally, Kashawn Aitchison was his usual aggressive, punishing self defensively, but also showed a bit more composure, a bit better play selection. He made some better reads. It was good overall. So we want to Team USA. They had a couple of standouts. First and foremost, Jack Murtagh was by far the best player in both of these games. He cemented himself as a first-round talent. Elite shot, great aggression and pace and motor offensively. Outworks defenders on the forecheck whenever he can. Obviously, he was facing off against some of the best defenders in the entire draft class, but still showed some decent skill on the forecheck and some ability to create that way. Maceo Phillips on defense was decent. He's a big body, 6'5", defends really well. I thought he was a bit more poised and calm than I expected of him. And that was really impressive to watch. Will Moore in flashes. I'll specify in flashes. Will Moore is very interesting because he's frail, very, very frail. Sometimes you watch him and you think, man, if you just blow towards this guy, he's just going to fly to the other side of the ice. He's really, really light. But in some flashes, he showed some forechecking skills, some defensive skills, some goal scoring skill, showed some playmaking chops as well. Again, but it's all very much in flashes. I think Will Moore continues to be just a very high end projection. You really need to trust your development team to draft this prospect. And finally, William Bell was really interesting from the fourth line. He was aggressive, a good forechecker, showed some decent chops in transition, was pretty impressive on the forecheck. Just your meat and potatoes guy, but there were some flashes of skill in there that I really wasn't expecting of him. And yeah, he played a decent couple of games for Team USA. That's our second segment done regarding the standouts. Now we'll get into the disappointments. Talk about who disappointed in these last in these last two games in the CHL USA Prospect Challenge in a second. Just before, a quick word from our sponsors. Quick PSA to anyone who rents. If you haven't heard of Built, you're about to thank me. Earning points on rent is now a reality when you pay your rent through Built Rewards. You don't even have to check with your landlord to start earning points right away that you can use towards flights, hotel stays, fitness classes, and even your next rent payment. Let me break it down for you. There's no cost to join Built, and as a member, you'll earn valuable points on rent and on your everyday spending. Built points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones you haven't heard of. There are over 500 airlines and over 700,000 hotels and properties around the world that you can redeem your Built points towards. So start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl. That's joinbilt.com/lockedonnhl. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl to start earning points on your next rent payments today. Alrighty, so closing off here in our final segment on the CHL USA Prospect Challenge, let's talk about the disappointments in these last couple of games. And I really want to start with Porter Martone, even though productively and in terms of finesse skill, he really showed how good he is and how solid of a prospect he is and why he deserves to be in the top 5 conversation for the 2025 NHL draft. My issue with that is the pace still isn't there. The decision making still isn't there. We were shooting from everywhere tonight, trying these low percentage, short angle, kind of top shelf kind of shots where it had no chance of going in. He really wanted to show how dominant skill wise he is when actually, when you ask scouts, they have no doubt about his skill. That's not what they're curious about. That's not what they want to see improve in this game. What they want to see out of Porter Martone is high paced decisions, in motion plays where he's grabbing pucks in transition, playing them up the ice really quickly, really intelligently, and making good decisions. I didn't see that from Porter Martone. So personally, I'm disappointed, given what I wanted to see from Martone, what I wanted to see him work on in these couple of games. It still isn't there in this game. I still think it's a concern, and for the moment, for me, he's an outsider in the top 5. He's at 4th or 5th overall. I see Michael Misa and Matthew Schaefer and James Higgins as better prospects right now. But overall, he's still phenomenally skilled. It's just, based on what people want to see, what the people who scout these games, who go to these games thinking, I want to evaluate this player. What they want to see from Porter Martone isn't what we saw in these couple of games. So in that sense, he is disappointing. Now moving on, Braden Coots, honestly for me, I didn't really see him much in these games. He didn't really stand out at all for me. So in that sense, I really wanted to see Coots, push the pace, show that high-end motor, that high-end skating that he has and use it aggressively, use it liberally, and he just didn't. We had a pretty quiet couple of games. The other main disappointment for me in these 2 games for Team Canada, the major one I would say, is Reese Hamilton. Hamilton, he skates and prays. That's his game. He skates up the ice and hopes that whatever happens as a result of his skating is good. And if it's not good, well, let's restart and try again. There isn't much forethought or predictive kind of elements in this game where he's kind of look forward and see what's going to happen next. He just kind of heads into plays with no set plan. And that was very clear in these games, both offensively and defensively. Didn't really show much processing, much advanced awareness, anything like that. Really kind of stuck to his guns of skate hard, move up the ice, and try some stuff. And it just wasn't working today. There's a reason why he's a seventh defenseman on this roster. Quinn Beauchesne was much more reliable for me than Reese Hamilton was in these games. And yeah, I thought that Team Canada would prefer his style on Jackson Smith's right. I was wrong. They saw the same things I do, and yeah, it's been a rough couple of months, couple of weeks for Reese Hamilton as he got pushed down and down and down the Calgary Hitmen lineup until he was the seventh defenseman there, and then got traded to Regina just before the CHL USA Prospects Challenge. So let's hope that this change of air, this change of environment, helps him kind of find his game and develop a bit more responsibility with the puck. Last player I want to mention as a disappointment on Team Canada's side, Jack Ivankovic, as I mentioned before, uh, with Brampton, unsolvable. He faces 50 shots a game, allows 2 goals, and plays insanely and makes all the saves. It makes you think, my goodness, this could be a top 15 pick if only he wasn't 3'6" or whatever size he is, right? But I mean, in this game, it just really seemed like, yeah, this is a momentum goalie. He needs a lot of shots. He needs a lot of adversity in order to stand out as a player. And yeah, by facing what I think it was 13 or 14 shots in the second game, it was very clear that, Ivan Kovic needs a lot of shots to be effective. He allowed 2 goals. One of them was really rough. The other one was a breakaway against Cole McKinney where McKinney deked the lights out. But still, Ivan Kovic could have gotten there regardless. I still think that all that these last 2 games have done is just bridge, just widen the gap between Josh Ravensbergen and Jack Ivankovic, which isn't good for Ivankovic. But that's not good for his stock. He's already a small goalie. The odds are stacked against him. He needs these opportunities to prove how good he is. He should have been able to be the better goalie in these 2 games, and he just wasn't. Finally, for Team USA, let's talk about the disappointments on their side. There are 3 of them. First and foremost, Charlie Trethewey. Charlton Trethewey. He was on the pair with Drew Shock the Fourth, which is the best names D pairing of all time. But Trethewey was really disappointing in these 2 games. He just, especially in the last period of the last game, he basically fell apart. He could not handle any defensive scenarios. He was trying to hit everyone. He was taking himself out of plays. Not reacting to pressure well at all on the breakout, and just kind of throwing pucks up the ice, turning things over. I'd like to see anyone's reasoning for why Trethewey would be a first rounder, because he's still a first rounder in some boards, and I just don't see it. And I'd love to hear the arguments as to why. I'm not going to sit here and say I know everything. I don't. I'm very curious to know other people's perspectives on this. What is it about Trethewey that makes him a first rounder? I mean, yes, he's got size. He's a decent-ish skater, but my goodness, can he not handle pressure at all? And in the NHL, that's all you face is pressure, pressure, pressure. Even the worst, on-puck defensemen in the NHL are still able to handle pressure and make it pass through a layer of pressure. Trethewey can't. And it's a very hard thing to learn when you're not used to it at all, especially given that he's playing against USHL and NCAA competition who actually do pressure them. It's not like he's playing in the Swedish J20 where he's got 10 seconds to figure out what he's going to do with the puck before someone closes in on him. Forecheckers are pretty aggressive in the USHL, and especially, when he's playing NCAA competition with the NTDP. There needs to be more on that side. LJ Mooney was also pretty disappointing, mainly because I honestly forgot he was playing half the time. He was unnoticeable in these 2 games, basically didn't do much, even though he was playing on the second line with Will Moore. When I saw Will Moore there, I was like, oh, cool, Will Moore. I should have been able to see, oh, well, LJ Mooney's there. What's he doing? And then notice him. Nope. He just barely did anything in these 2 games, and that was pretty disappointing as well. Mooney just came back from injury, though, so we'll give him a break on that side. It takes some time to get back in the flow of things. Who knows? Maybe he gets back into form and proves me wrong. But so far, this season overall, even before the big hit and the big injury he suffered this year, for a 5'6" player, 5'7" player, the main thing you want them to be able to do is stand out offensively, and it just hasn't since the start of the year. So based on that, for me, not a first rounder. And finally, Ben Kevon. He played in the top 6 both games. You're thinking, well, that's good. That means he played well, right? Not really. He was chasing play, being really aggressive on certain plays where he shouldn't be aggressive, and being very much passive in situations where he should have been aggressive. His toggle on that side wasn't good. His reads weren't as good. So honestly, I was a bit disappointed with these games from Kevon. I think being thrust into a top 6 role after being basically a 13th forward or fourth liner for the last couple of times he played for the NTDP kind of hurt his ability to kind of connect with teammates and think on their level. I still think there's high end skill there with Kevon, but maybe not a first rounder so far for me. And that kind of tracks based on what I've seen from him before this little CHL USA showcase. But that wraps things up for today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review, and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And remember to check in for our next episodes as we start the month of December and our coverage, and hopefully very soon, the World Junior Championships. This has been Hattie Kalikesh, usually with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.